version because we also conducted it in Chimeria in Xanthi. Yeah. So what is MAMCA in the first place? It's the tool that we use in Renaissance to engage stakeholders, but at the same time to also evaluate different energy community alternatives or options. And in general, it's also to assess the objectives and the performance of these objectives in the implementation phase. It's a tool to engage in stakeholders and let them participate in the energy community design. And then if there are conflicts, which are the most case studies that we did not yet there because it was at the very beginning. But if there are conflicts, it's also a tool to form consensus on different solutions. So here's the MAMCA process in more complicated, but it's not that complicated actually. So you have different alternatives for the energy communities, which can be co-developed with stakeholders, or there are already different solutions at stake that are discussed. Then you identify different stakeholders, for example, the DSO, local government, regulator, and most importantly, citizens, or the most common energy end consumers in the system. And here, then we use different criteria, or they share their objectives with us, usually with a survey or directly in a workshop. And we use their criteria that they communicate with us to assess the different energy community alternatives. And then as a result, taking into account the weights of the criteria and also the performance of the indicators to measure these alternatives, you have like an overview of which scenario performs best for which kind of stakeholder. And then you can iterate the process and improve the scenarios that are being implemented. And here I have now I want to basically go through a case study example, which is a fictional Springfield. And it's based on the MNIS case that we also heard before. So it's a very supportive and active municipality. And you have a lot of different stakeholders at the site. So normal consumers, but also prosumers, the municipality, the distribution system operator, a school, and fictional also a big international car company. And what was the goal is to transition to climate neutrality or energy neutrality by 2030. And what are different ways to achieve this? It was discussed with the municipality. What kind of options are there to be implemented? It's the business as usual. That's basically they stay like this and they already have 25% PVs. Or you build a prosumer network, which would be that all these people who have already private PVs installed would unite in a sort of virtual power plant and then trade with other neighbors for more profit. Or you build an energy community, which would mean they build a legal entity, and within this legal entity they share and trade energy among each other, and they co-invest into new assets or storage, for example. And yeah, here just to visualize it, so the business usually is more traditional, where they buy their energy directly from the grid, and those who have already PVs, they reduce their consumption from the grid. And from the prosumer network, so you have the normal community, but then you have like this more exclusive prosumer network where they can share the energy among each other for less costs, or sell it for more profit to other neighbors. And then here the energy community scenario, where you basically have the grid, but then you have the energy community that's basically building a local and integrated energy system. And now we would go to the tool. And is it here? Yeah. So this is the interface of, kick me out. So here's the interface of the MAMCA software, and here it was already developed before, and we're continuously improving it with.
No. Here in the introduction, can we make a new project now online?
Yeah, I created one project that I presented just now. So you can open the project. I entered the different scenarios. One can also put a description. These are very short descriptions, but if you are working with people that are using this at home alone, then of course you could put more description. Although it's usually done in an workshop, so I think it's better to explain people in person. And then there are the different actors. So usually what is done, that they get their own invitation to the software interface, and then they would start in point 3. So they would not see the other stakeholders being there, or they cannot change it at least. And then here, this is something that is that I would want to do now as a joint exercise. I already have put the different criteria.
So each of those actors that come in, that log in, they say, okay, enter your criteria. Yeah.
Usually I put it in because I would have conducted a survey ahead. Okay. But you can also do it like this, and then say, okay, 5 to 6 most important criteria, and then they can put it in. And then what is done is and it's called an AHP comparison, what is in something that we can do now just to see how it works. Because then after this exercise, each of the criteria gets importance weight. So there are some.
How is the weight defined?
Yeah, here we can do this for the consumer because I left it open. So it's, you compare each of the criteria with each other. And then as a result, you get like, sometimes it's also a very
here what's missing. A comment. Sorry.
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry for being rude, interrupting you. But here what's missing is what is, the explanation going left, right. I mean, 9, like grid functionality is that much better and more important than reduction of costs. I mean,
yeah, usually, it's done in a workshop where you give them explanations for first. So I have maybe a slide saying, okay, you go 9 if grid functionality is the most important.
I remember when you were in Xanthi for Wikimedia for the presentation, we discussed this and there was no question. Because Maria explained this tag, she explained it.
Yeah, no, but in the case, I mean, when we had when we were presenting to someone similar things, and there was the guy from social sciences expert just on this kind of how methodologies, how you evaluate the statistical and then control groups, the other groups. He said it's always important to stress out, even though it's intuitive, that what it should mean, that you have it written just in case, it's more.
Yeah, usually, you have to imagine there's a screen where I show the slides.
Yeah.
And then you have the arrows, and then they usually get a tablet. We did that. We also had computers there, and then they can indicate it, so they always see it on screen. Yeah. But okay, maybe we can go through it together, taking the perspective of an energy end consumer in this case. So we can go through this. Maybe what do you consider more important, grid functionality or reduction of cost?
First, reduction of cost, man.
Cost reduction?
Yeah.
And maybe which?
Of course.
I don't know. Six?
At least, yes.
6?
But it's,
6 is good? Yeah.
Okay.
And then reduction of cost versus increase of renewables.
Question.
Yeah, what is more important to you?
Sorry for interrupting. When you define the consumer, can it be like 100 consumers doing this, or just one? representative?
That's something we are working on at the moment, because at the moment it's really, you invite different energy and consumers, and then they are grouped together in a workshop. So there would be 5 of them being there, sitting in a group, and they have to agree on one of these. Yeah. But now as we're working on mass participation, there's also that you can send this to 100 energy and consumers, for example, and then you see the statistics of it, and their age or gender or income, and then you build a consumer group.
Because this is something that is really helpful and very interesting also as a research question. Because, for example, you said 6, I would say 9.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the end, like if it's 6 or 9, I mean, it's not correct science in that sense. Like, you will not, in the end, the values that you get there are debatable in any case. Like, it's not like hard science.
I know, yeah. but still, when you get you're doing this to get a estimation. Yeah. So that science, if you have 100 people doing this, you will see what is most important.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so increase of renewables, reduction of cost.
Reduction of cost.
5, 8, 2.
Let's say 7.
Okay. Reduction of cost or community building. If it's equal, then you can stay on the 0.
Okay, let's go with this.
Okay. Reduction of cost or education, or equal, or.
Let's say education.
Yeah, from university.
Yeah.
So 5. Okay. Grid functionality or increase of renewables.
Increase of renewables.
5, 6, 2.
Let's say 6.
Okay. Grid functionality and community building. 8. Okay. Grid functionality or education, or same.
Education.
6, 7.
7.
Increase of renewables in community building.
I would go for community building.
Yes. Yeah. 5 or 8. 3. Increase of renewables and education.
Same.
Yeah. 0. Then it's equally important. Community building, education.
I would go for 5 for education.
Yeah. Okay. And then we can save this, and then we can see here our results. So education was obviously the most important, and then reduction of costs, so it still ended up quite high. Community building, increase of renewables, and least important, grid functionality. And then in the next step is the...
Depends, like you said before, it depends on who is
evaluating.
Yes. Because if it's the prosumer or the simple consumer,
it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. Yeah. I don't care about the grid functionality I don't have it as a priority. Other things matter to me. So it would be different answers.
Yeah, true. That's why I think it's indeed quite interesting to separate the energy consumers, or to look more specifically into them, because this is the group that is the most numerous. Yeah. So I hope we progress on the mass participation aspect. And then in the next step, it's the evaluation of the different scenarios based on the criteria that we identified. So this is also up to us now. So what you can see here is the different scenarios or energy community options that we have. And then we have to ask ourselves if reduction of cost is better achieved in a prosumer model, for example, or in the business as usual one.
This is a wrong approach, I would say, because how can a consumer know?
Usually it's done. So it's done in 2 ways. Either you do it in a workshop, and then you can ask the stakeholders, and it's actually quite interesting to see what they think. I know it's completely objective, subjective, but what we then do is enter our data, what we have from models, which is done by the Reenergize tool, and enter the correct data and compare it with each other. But to do this, like we have done it in Chimeria also, and it's interesting to see what people actually think, you know, like I know how do they know this, but we would give some explanation on the scenarios, of course. But it's interesting to see their views without having all the information on the scenarios yet.
Interesting, because in my perspective, if I would show this to my mom, you always need to look not outside the bin. This is the first common mistake of all the researchers and engineers, because they think that everybody knows
what they are talking about.
Yeah, what they're talking about. But here, if I would show this to my mom, she would, business as usual, presumer model. I have no idea what business as usual is, and I don't have no idea what presumer model is.
But if your mother, my mother, participated, she would participate from step one. She wouldn't land on this.
But then, is it meant to be? Is this tool meant to be as how to say, just as a? It's not that you could basically. You would need to have education before. I mean, and presentations. It's not streamlining. You can't avoid how to say.
Well, that's also why there are workshops usually.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot avoid workshops. You would need to have a. Okay, then I understand. Then it's okay.
Like this tool today, I present half an hour. Yeah, so usually it takes a bit more time. But this is the idea that you ask them. Okay, either this step is done only by us using the data that we have, but sometimes it's really interesting, or at least we saw that it's interesting to see what stakeholders actually perceive, because sometimes they think, oh yeah, this will be impacting noise super badly, and then we can actually show them up. But you don't have to be afraid of the noise level, for example.
Okay, here, prosumer model, let's say 4.
Yeah. Energy community or business as usual.
6.
And then prosumer model and energy community.
Energy community. 6, 7.
Grid functionality.
Business as usual.
Yeah.
It's testing. 6, 7.
Business as usual and energy community.
I think business as usual again.
The same or
yeah.
Prosumer model or energy community.
Maybe prosumer model.
It can also be in the middle.
I would go for energy community or in the middle.
Okay.
Increase of renewables.
Prosumer level 5.
Yeah. And energy community and business as usual.
Energy community.
7 or 8.
Energy community, I would say again.
10.
So to which degree?
4.
4. Community building.
Community building. Prosumer is always better than business as usual.
4, 5.
5.
And energy community.
Energy community, like 7, 8.
And prosumer.
No, business as usual. I would go if it's community building. The energy community is 9.
Okay. 9? Okay.
It's. Otherwise.
And between.
Prosumer, I would say energy community again, but let's say 6.
Okay.
And then education.
Prosumer model.
Prosumer model, definitely. An energy community afterwards, and energy community also.
6.
6, 7, 6.
What do you think?
5.
6.
6. Education. Energy community.
5.
5. Okay. Okay, so now we can see here in the numbers. This is the result. It doesn't look nice now, but this is the overview that you get out of, because, okay, we have done now for the consumer. You see here the results, and the energy community is performing quite well. But I filled out fictionally for the others. And this is the result you can use in a workshop. And then it's actually quite interesting. You can see in red the business as usual, in dark blue the prosumer, and in light blue the energy community scenario. And what's interesting to see are, for example, when the prosumer model. So what's interesting to see that for two actors, actually the business as usual is better than the prosumer model, or they perceive it as such. And here we have a real difference for the prosumer, because for them the prosumer model is the most preferred, and for the energy end consumers it's more the energy community, and also for the other stakeholders. So what we actually see, that the energy community is quite an interesting scenario for most stakeholders, and then for the prosumers it's a little less. And yeah, you can also specify more clearly on individual results. So we go into ours that we have now filled out. So what we can see, yeah, okay, the business as usual is actually performing the worst on most of the indicators. Just on grid functionality, it's probably better than the others. And energy community is performing the best among most, and it's equal on grid functionality.
With the prosumer model.
Exactly. And the prosumer model is somewhere, yeah, in the middle. And when you show this to different stakeholders, it's sometimes quite interesting that other stakeholders see the perceptions of others and maybe reflect more on why specific solutions are not the best or are rejected by some. And for example, here we have the DSO. It looks a bit different with, yeah, for example, the business as usual scenario is only one time preferred, and the other ones are actually also quite interesting for the DSO. Depends, of course, on the DSO as well. Like for MNES, it was quite interesting because the DSO said it was no difference for him at all.
Do they all need to have the same criteria?
No, they all have different.
No, I mean, they can, let's say, for example, DSO would say grid functionality, then instead of education, he would say something else.
Yeah, I mean, if you can see here in the criteria, we don't have the same criteria for all of them. Quite similar.
And but how do you combine this?
How I combine what? So the thing is, like in most new participatory evaluations, it's not done anymore on same criteria. Like if you do a participatory scenario evaluation, it's often done with changing criteria. And if you have like more environmental requirements, then it's usually, very rigid criteria, but then it's a bit different because it has to be like a standard that you have to achieve, for example.
How do you combine them?
How do you come? The thing is,
because at the end, like here you have, if you would go by.
Yeah, the overall result is done per stakeholder and scenario, and it's different criteria. So you don't compare the different criteria. The performance per stakeholder group is not based on the same criteria. So you don't compare this because, for example, affordability is a criteria that is often mentioned, but it would also have very different values for each stakeholder. For example, if you take a DSO that potentially loses revenue or has increased costs by the implementation of an energy community, the score for this indicator would be low. While if we are talking about an energy community as an entity, affordability would be performing better, but maybe worse for an individual. So yeah, this is just different criteria for different stakeholders. But it, of course, requires sometimes a lot of measurements and assessments, because if every stakeholder has different ones, then you end up with quite a lot.
That's why I'm saying it's very. That's why I asked, because it looked totally different aspects. And it's really, you know, you're not. I mean, you're matching pears and apples. You know, and it's not.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you know, you can use this tool for making a very participatory workshop to talk about different things. Let people think about their objectives. What do they want? Let people think about the scenarios. What does these scenarios entail? What could be potential benefits or negative aspects? And then you could see, okay, if you look at the overall result, if you have something like this, you already see, okay, maybe the community would be interested in an energy community, but how do we actually improve this scenario also for the prosumers? Or maybe the prosumer example is also interesting for most, but how could we bring this more to the most benefiting one?
So the end results don't have to do directly with the criteria, but in some steps behind there was an evaluation per scenario, criteria and scenario, and then stakeholder and scenario.
I mean, yeah, you have the different ones. So you have one time the scenario on the individual person, and then referring to the criteria, and the other one is then on a comparative. And you also have a sensitivity analysis. Okay, this is maybe. The thing is, like, the tool is as strong as you use it. So if you want to have it very shortly, you want to conduct it very shortly as an engagement tool, then it's certainly not hard science. But if you use this as an monitoring tool, like, and you actually can gather all the data, and it's quite interesting to see and can be used anyways for decision or consensus building. So yeah, we have, the thing is with energy communities so far, it was often conducted in the design phase, or where it was like not much conflict. And this is also a lot about seeing where they're actually differing opinions.